I think Georgia is missing something, or at least lacking it compared to previous years, recent years, that you need to help win. I think Georgia's lacking something, and that is leadership. No, that's not me looking at this Georgia roster and saying that guy's not a leader, that guy's not a leader, this person can't step up and be a leader. That's not what I'm saying at all. All of those things can happen. Some of those things will happen. There will be guys on this Georgia team that we didn't perceive as leaders, as older guys that are leading the younger guys. There will be younger guys that step up as leaders. We don't know that yet. But when you look at it right now and you're projecting ahead at this 2025 season, and you know what you know about this roster, is that there's a lot of it that's inexperienced, and there's a lot of it that's inexperienced at Georgia. And to me, I think when you compare what I think we're going to see this season in terms of roster makeup, I think when you compare it to, obviously, the national championship teams, but even the last two seasons, right? The last two seasons were not national championship teams. They competed for it. They had opportunities to get there. They had tons of leadership and players that had been around for a long time and had been really impactful for a long time. I look at this 2025 Georgia Bulldog team, and I don't see that as much. I don't see the Cedric Van Prans of the world. They're just not. They're not on this list as much. There are a handful of guys that are going to be starters this coming season that have been starters for at least 2 years. But when you look at the list, you look at this defense, you're going to see a lot of guys who either haven't played much or haven't started much. You look at the offense, you see that brand new offensive line. You see a quarterback in Gunnar Stockton that now has a little bit of experience, definitely has the backing of this team. And I think that the SEC Championship proved that there are some leadership aspects to Gunnar Stockton. But let's face it, he's a quiet guy, and he hasn't been in these big moments for the most part. He's kind of only been in a couple of big moments in college football, but he hasn't been the quarterback on a week-to-week basis in the grind and having a program on your shoulders like he will in 2025. So I think Georgia is lacking leadership. Let's talk about it. I've got instances where I think it's mattered, and moments where, even if it wasn't a moment that was in a huge game, moments where it just showed that there was something special about the team because it had people like that on it. Ryan Curley from Dawg Post. Is Georgia lacking leadership in 2025? I want to, like I said again, because if Kirby or a Georgia player or someone saw this, they would be like, "You're not in the locker room. What are you thinking, Ryan?" I'm thinking from an outside perspective looking in. I can see, and I've covered the team and know that Tate Ratledges don't grow on trees. That Malachi Starks don't grow on trees. Nolan Smiths don't grow on trees. Why am I saying people like this as my voice just disappears a little bit? I'm saying it because not only are those players that are impactful and future NFL players, some of them are now actual NFL players, but they are guys that meant something to the program that meant that they were people that you looked up to. They were people that you just they were the default Georgia Bulldogs. They were the ones that you thought about in the big moments. They're the ones that are captains and voted as captains. I don't know who's going to be voted as captains. I have a couple of guys that I think would be voted as captains on this team, and some of them are obvious. You look at this season, starters that have a lot of experience that are seniors this coming season. Oscar Delp, Dylan Bell, Dalen Everett. Those are the three that I came up with. You look at on defense, you look through the defensive line, the front seven. Gabe Harris will probably start. Christian Miller will probably start. Jordan Hall will probably start. Guys like that. Potentially Joseph Jonah. These are all not names that have been impactful guys and have known to have been leading this defense, this team. In the secondary, it's being gutted. KJ Bolden is going to start being a guy, an example of one of those younger guys that more is going to be asked of him. All right, you're a former 5-star. You're a guy that started as a true freshman. Now you're entering your sophomore season. And it's a defensive back room that's going to have some new faces in it. Dalen Everett is a senior, right? One of those other guys that was talking about along with Delp and Bell. Those will be the guys on offense. But then when you look at the offensive line, you'll have Freeling, who's been around, and he will probably turn into one of these guys that I'm talking about. You have Micah Morris, who's been around, but they just haven't started as much, and so their impact hasn't been as big. Drew Bobo, a guy that's been around, has played in he'll be on the offensive line. You might get a freshman. People are projecting that Daniel Calhoun takes one of the guard spots. You might get a redshirt freshman, right? So there's going to be youth. When you talk about the running back room, It's Nate Frazier at sophomore. Cash Jones, an older guy, potentially one of these guys. Cash Jones is a senior that's been around for a while. He just hasn't, been a primary starter. I think obviously he was roped into the lineup a lot more this season. But in that running back room, you've got a couple guys who haven't played. You've got a couple freshmen from last year, and you got Cash Jones. And of course, at that the wide receiver position, you got transfers along with Dylan Bell. You've got younger guys along with Dylan Bell. And at the quarterback position, you have Gunnar Stockton, who is now going to be tasked with being, the offensive leader on this football team. I think about moments from the last few years where I felt like older leadership really mattered. And sometimes there is a point where the leadership comes out through play, right? When you think about Brock Bowers as an example, you think about a guy that could have put the team on his back. Well, part of why he could put the team on his back was because of the fact that he was an alien when it came to football, and he's just not a normal person and is elite, right? You think about the Auburn game, how he and Carson Beck put the teams on their back. Beck, older guy that's been around, but he wasn't a starter. You're relying on Brock Bowers, who is the superstar. That's not a perfect example, but I think about other moments. I think about Nolan Smith and how much of a vocal leader he was and how he was around for a long time, and he stuck around for his fourth season, and he's the one riling people up in the offseason, talking about how people were telling the 2022 Georgia team that they were going to go 7-5, right? You have guys like that. You have guys like Cedric Van Pran, who started, returned, could have left, and then ended up staying for another go-round in 2023, a guy that was at multiple SEC media days as a representative of the team. You've got the Missouri game in 2022. You think about older guys that really made an impact in that game, late in the game. Kenny McIntosh, Dejan Edwards, Stetson Bennett. Brock Bowers makes a huge play in that game. That was a night where up in Columbia, Missouri, Georgia was losing to a team that it was better than, and it had to fight and claw out for a win, and it couldn't do that without all of the older players on that team. Now, I talk about, there are other examples. There are other examples. You think about some moments from this Texas game, right, where people rally behind Gunnar Stockton, and that shows, hey, maybe this could be something for Gunnar Stockton. People rallied behind ETN, who was a transfer, and you say, oh, wow, well, they really rallied behind ETN. Well, he got up in front of the team and talked about how much it meant to be a Georgia Bulldog. That's my question is, there are just going to be a lot of new faces on this team. I discussed it in a video the other day. Is this going to be a rebuilding year for the Georgia Bulldogs? Is this going to be a season where you see some youth out there, you see in certain positions they aren't as experienced, maybe not quite as talented as they were in certain areas, and you say, is this going to be a year where, hey, look, they might lose 2 or 3 games again, and it feels like they're rebuilding and pushing towards the next season having a little bit of an older roster with guys with more experience together. That's kind of how I project the 2025 season a little bit at the moment. I've got to wait until spring and we see, what is this Gunnar Stockton and Zachariah Brandt's connection? Are these defensive guys better than maybe what we think just because we haven't seen them play? Is the offensive line going to be better, right? Because you think about how Georgia's run game was really disappointing. Some of that's on the running backs, but some of that's on the offensive line. And I think your first assumption is to look at an offensive line and assume that if you're missing 4 starters, it's not going to improve. Well, it was a group that kind of contradicts my point. It had some older leaders on it, like Tate Ratledge, that meant a lot. And it's a group that most felt like it underperformed. And even though it had older guys like Truss and Ratledge and Dylan Fairchild. So there's going to be new faces in here. Sometimes new can be a really good thing, and fresh can be a really good thing. But I look at this Georgia team and I do question, who are going to be the guys that step up? Is Oscar Delp going to be a guy that can put Georgia on his back both on the field and in the locker room and be an example? Like I said, Nakobe Deans, Nolan Smiths, they don't grow on trees. You look at Ohio State's championship roster last year, this past couple weeks, they had older guys who stayed. They had older guys who had played a lot together and meant a lot, like Jack Sawyer and Emeka Egbuka, JTT, right, who had been through a lot together. This Georgia team just hasn't, for the most part, hasn't gone through all of these things together the way that a couple of years ago did. So I wonder who is going to step up and be the leaders on this team, because I think it's less obvious than in years past. It's not impossible, but less obvious. So Hope you're hearing me out. If you found this, someone in the program, if you found this video and was listening to what I had to say, take it as a challenge. Step up and be a leader, because it doesn't seem like there are as many guys on the team this season with experience, which is just the truth. Thanks for watching.